Hello, everybody. What the fright? We are back. We are talking about some of the greatest horror movies of the 21st century so far, and we are talking about kind of one of the undisputed modern classics of the vampire genre. And we are here with Tyler MacIntyre, the director of Tragedy Girls, in theaters October 20th. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about Let the Right One In, and we will go to a clip.
So Let the Right One In, I think, is probably the most well-crafted horror movie of the last 20 years. Like, it's like on par with like The Shining in terms of just being like next level in terms of like cinematography, pacing, and just going after such a specific mood. And I think it's it kind of sets itself apart in that it doesn't really rely on what you consider like traditional horror tropes in order to create that sort of terror.
Awesome. Let's take a look.
Är du vampyr?
Hade du tyckt om mig ändå?
Okay, so the year was 2000X. And the vampire genre really wasn't. Twilight really hadn't made it into big in theaters yet, but everyone was talking about the books and everything. And I think the idea was that vampires kind of weren't scary at the moment. And then Let the Right One In comes out, and like, holy hell! And honestly, all it kind of does is basically just take it seriously.
Yeah, definitely. Like, and there's something like really terrifying about like this movie is like a well-crafted drama first, and then it happens to be a horror movie.
Yeah.
And and just like the idea of what it's doing, like with the character work is fundamental, and it's like I always find it much scarier when the monster element is like metaphorically related to the characters.
What's going on in Let the Right One In, it's really kind of a story of friendship. It's also a story of manipulation and sort of the allure of the other, of the vampire. We've seen this in movies many times before, where people are lured into a world of monsters by promises of power, by promises of living forever. And here it's just, I'm the only one who gets you.
Definitely, yeah, and again, like that relationship between those two child leads, Oscar and Eli, are just so good. It's really very intimidating. But what I find kind of interesting is just like they really have different like relations to violence. Like when we meet Oscar, he's like he's a kid who's kind of marginalized and a bit of an outsider, but he's also very bullied, and he has like this like, instead of it being like approached traditionally as in terms of like, isn't it sad that he gets bullied at school? Like we see that like there's this passion in him and this like pent up aggression.
Yeah.
And like how like that sort of like is leading to like alienation.
Yeah. And
then when he finds this connection to somebody who has this inherent power and is reluctant to use it, like they really mine that.
He is, when we first meet him, I'd actually almost kind of forgotten this until I rewatched it again this week. He is kind of on a path to darkness even before the vampire, because yes, he's bullied, and yes, that is tragic, but his coping mechanism is to stab things and say that they're his bully. He has, even before he meets a vampire, he has a scrapbook of serial killer clippings from newspapers. He is getting obsessive about some really dark things.
Yeah, definitely, and that's something that like when I was growing up, like it was like a big concern, like kids, interested in macabre things, and like especially with like the Columbine and everything, like there was like this sense of alienation that I think like was pervasive in in Western culture especially, but culture in general, that since when 9/11 happened, we kind of forgot about it. It was kind of like there was movies that were starting to deal with it, like The Matrix and Fight Club and stuff like that, like late 90s. And then when 9/11 happened, we just kind of hit that with patriotism and forgot about the fact that everyone was pissed off. And then this movie takes place even though it's set, I think, in the 80s.
I think early 80s, yeah.
Yeah, it was made in, and was incredibly relevant in that there's still this smoldering like a sense of violence and like how we're kind of bottling things up as culture as well as individuals that we've never dealt with.
Well, it's a story about children, but there are adult characters, and what you notice is that the adult characters aren't taking an interest in their kids. These kids are left to their own. I mean, the vampire is obviously a vampire, but our protagonist, Oscar, his mother like goes out and says, listen, there's a serial killer out. Don't leave the yard. But it's like an apartment complex. The yard is, anyone can get to that yard. We see a vampire kill people in that yard. There's this certain neglect for his emotional and just psychological growth that is just letting him be influenced by whatever. And so he's perfect fodder for a vampire.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think that it's interesting the way that like we're very scared of Eli most of the time. But that said, like there's such a something so disarming.
Well, that's
about,
that's the power of her, because she is. I mean, she's been 12 for hundreds of years, I think, is what she says, and as a result, we want to sympathize with her because she is a child, but she's not. She is something much stranger and darker. And one thing I realized when I was watching the movie is that this is kind of a movie because we see that she has an older man who's taking care of her and getting her blood for her, and that she has as intimate a relationship with him as she does with Oscar over the course of the movie. This is kind of just about like a vampire getting their own Renfield. If you remember in Dracula, Renfield was this guy that Dracula manipulated psychologically, kept him human so he would do his bidding, and she's losing one. He's getting, even before something happens, he's getting older, he's getting more forgetful, it's getting harder for him to do what he has to do, and now she's just sort of getting this other person like on the hook, and starting to reel him in, so that, because you could say they're friends, sure, or maybe she's just horrifically manipulating him.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think like it's out of necessity for her, like as a vampire or whatever, like within the story, but like it's it really speaks to the nature of like how like emotional relationships can be very like emotional. It can be emotionally vampiric, and there's something just so perfectly dark about like when you realize that like we're seeing kind of two ends of the same. When you come to that slow fall realization, when we're very much with Oscar, like falling into this relationship and kind of like that, like hinting at like early romance, and then seeing like how real that feels for us, and then seeing like where it can lead. Yeah,
we're seeing both sides of the story kind of simultaneously, and it's kind of really. Thomas Alfredson is, I think it's fair to say, he's a very chilly director. And you can say that with the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and you can say that with this. His characters have emotions. Sometimes I wonder if he does, because he just is so like objective and cold, and it really just gives these characters room to breathe and be creepy.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is like, I mean, I would definitely describe Tinker Tailor as kind of cold, like on a character level, but this, like, I find it pulls you into their point of view a lot. Like even though it has like an extremely measured pace, and as all work does, and I think, like it's more emotional than it it lets on at first, but you don't realize that you're getting invested until you're into your like, oh, like like you're almost in tears.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm trying to think. There are other great vampire movies that we've had somewhat recently, but this is on a level. You're right. This you compared it to The Shining. I would compare it to anything from Nosferatu onward. This is this is a vampire story. This is kind of everything about it. This is the scares. This is the allure. This is the fascination. This is the repugnance. And it's one of the best. And we've had a lot of requests to cover it so far. So thank you for joining us. And that was a good pick. Thank you so much. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the best horror movies of the 21st century on What the Fright.